I'm Calvin Walton, lecturer in elementary and special education on the Armstrong campus. I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Kristen Dickens, assistant professor in our counselor education department on the Statesboro campus, who will also facilitate this panel session with me today. Welcome, Kristen, as she will pose questions submitted from the attendees later in the session. There is also an evaluation everyone can submit at the end of our panel discussion today. The web link will be made available in the chat for today's participants. Now about the panel. We are honored that our panelist, Dr. Chelda Smith-Kondo, winner of the Commitment to Diversity and Inclusion Award for the College of Education, and Dr. Amy Atkins, professor and department chair of the middle grades and secondary education and ally in social justice, and Dr. Jamela Nurse Coles, alumni professor and author of the Being an Anti-Racist Workbook, and Mr. David Lewis, also an alumni and principal of Pearl Kahn High School and diversity educator, will participate in a discussion on the critical topic of being an anti-racist educator. The purpose of our panel discussion is to provide a space where alumni, students, faculty, and staff on all three of our campuses can explore relevant social justice topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to hear from our alumni about their level of preparedness when entering the field and concerns from our current students on what to expect, as well as staff and faculty can pose potential questions about how to engage in these discussions in our classrooms or when advising students, especially when the volume and intensity around these topics feel tense and uncomfortable. This is an opportunity to work as a collective college in bridging together the needs and ideas to take on our responsibility to discuss diversity matters. To pose a question to the panelists, please include your name, whether you are an alumni, student, staff, or faculty, in the Q&A box on the screen. Dr. Kristen Dickens will pose the questions to the panel during our Q&A time after the panel presentation. Also, remember, a link for the evaluation will be posted at the end of the panel discussion for you to submit your feedback. Now to the introduction of the panelists submitted by Brooke Armesto and Madison Setchell, students on our Statesboro campus.
I'm Brooke Armesto, a senior elementary education and special education major on the Statesboro campus at Georgia Southern University. It is my honor to introduce the panelists for today's session. Dr. Chelda Smith-Kondo. Dr. Kondo is an associate professor of elementary education at Georgia Southern University and winner of the Commitment to Diversity Award in the College of Education. Her research, service, teaching, and activism center the identities, socialization, education, and scholarly experiences of historically marginalized communities, especially people of color. She is the director of the Master of Arts in Teaching program focused on cultures and communities. Dr. Smith's most recent projects explore faculty cultural competency at the post-secondary level. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in cultural issues, critical pedagogy, and elementary curriculum. Dr. Amy Atkins. Dr. Atkins serves as the chair of the Department of Middle Grades and Secondary Education. A double Eagle alumna, Atkins studied German, history, and international studies before earning a Master of Education at Georgia Southern. She completed a PhD in Social Foundations of Education from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. A former professor at Illinois State University for 20 years, Atkins returned home to Georgia Southern College of Education in 2017. Atkins specializes in sociology of education, educational policy, equities, and social justice. Hi, I'm Madison Setchell, a senior elementary education major on the Statesboro campus at Georgia Southern University. It is my honor to introduce our next panelists for today's session. Dr. Jamela Nurse Coles. The Georgia Southern Double Eagle, Coles earned a bachelor's degree in special education and master's in teaching and learning from the College of Education. While teaching special education in Bullock County, Coles was named the recipient of the 2014 Georgia Teacher of the Year by the Department of Education and served as a board member for the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education for over a year. She earned a PhD in Educational Theory and Practice in 2018 from the University of Georgia and serves as a clinical instructor at UGA. She is the author of Being an Anti-Racist Teacher Workbook, public speaker, and consultant. Mr. David Lewis. Mr. Lewis is a scholar athlete who graduated from Georgia Southern with a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2009 and was also an Eagle football player. He started his career in the nonprofit sector, working with young men in under-resourced communities to assist with academics and coaching. Lewis then completed his initial teaching certification and became an 8th grade science teacher and football coach. After years of service in K-12 schools as a classroom teacher, diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator, instructional coach, and dean of students, Lewis is now the Freshman Academy principal at Pearl Kim High School in Nashville, Tennessee. Lewis holds 2 Master of Education degrees, one in instructional practice and the other in educational leadership. We are grateful to the panel for their time and sharing their experiences on this important topic. Thanks again for joining us and engaging in discussion.
Thanks again to Brooke and Madison for the panelist introductions. Now we will move into our segment for each panelist. Dr. Smith-Kondo will open the session. Then we will move forward with the panelists in the order in which they were introduced.
Good morning, everyone. So to begin our work today, I wanted to go ahead and orient us with some language. First, just basically discussing what is racism. I know that many of us might think of racism as just demonstrating hate towards another person, being rude. We might have the image of the KKK and folks that are hooded, but racism is so much more than just this, these interpersonal hate-filled behaviors. Racism is a system of social structures that provide or deny access, safety, resources, and power based on race categories and produces and reproduces race-based inequities. It affects individuals, but it's built on institutions, and it's really an integral part of the United States culture and really globally. So I'm going to sort of tease out what that might look like in 3 ways: interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and even internalized racism. So when we talk about institutional racism, really what we're talking about is that broad type of racism that shows up in policies, it shows up in laws, it takes up the ways that folks are framed in terms of where they live, their economic opportunities, their healthcare outcomes. Really, any sort of area of life has policies and practices that may or may not promote racism. So, for instance, one example of institutional racism within our sphere, our shared world, is how the university system of Georgia might fund or underfund certain institutions. We know in the state of Georgia, we have historically Black universities. Are they being funded? Are they being supported? Whether or not Black faculty and staff or administrators, when they're hired, are they being compensated at the same rate as their white counterparts if they have the same level of education and credentials? Whether or not we're hiring and giving opportunities and promotions to folks of color to the same degree that we might their white counterparts. Those are institutional practices. At the interpersonal level, interpersonal being person to person, that's the one that most of us are familiar with. So again, whether or not a person treats another one well or discriminates against them explicitly. For us in our own sphere, in our own work, interpersonal racism might look like how a hiring committee in the College of Ed might assume that a faculty or an applicant of color won't be as qualified, even though their resume or CV explicitly shows that they are. Maybe they say they won't, maybe they think they won't work as hard, or they won't fit into the department or program culture. Or sometimes I've even been in spaces where we talk about a potential applicant being excellent, but we won't pursue them because they won't stick around. just based off of that, and not even giving them the opportunity to be in the space. And so that interpersonal racism is really that one-on-one or group to a person or group to group interaction. I come to this work as a person who is very much experienced and continue to experience interpersonal racism, and most of the people who are on my hiring committee at one point or another shared with me that they didn't think that I would stick around because I was coming from the University of Minnesota all the way in the Midwest. And they thought, well, why would you stick around in little Statesboro? Why would you be here? And so I'm really thankful for those who were allies and who fought for me to be here, because I'm so thankful to be a part of the Georgia Southern faculty and to be able to continue to do this work so that institutional racism can be met with opportunities to be an ally. And finally, the last bit of racism I want to talk about is internalized racism. And that's when a person of color begins to believe and follow the mindset that they are inferior to their white counterparts. Or they might be fine being the token and want to separate themselves from people of color, want to separate themselves from their cultural heritage and background. So those are the three types of racism that I want you to hold as we talk about being anti-racist. Very quickly, I just want to say that anti-racist is to just actively oppose racism and promote racial equity. And you can do that from whatever role you play in the world, because racism is institutional, so it's all around us. And then I want you to also keep in mind that racism doesn't always mean that that you're considering or not considering Blackness. So there's anti-racism, but there's also anti-Blackness, meaning that a person can be very comfortable with maybe Asian or Latinx folks or Indigenous folks, but still have a hate for Blackness particularly.
So thank you so much for having me here today. The introductions were beautiful. They forgot to mention that I'm Mom of the Year because I survived quarantine with a toddler and a 7-year-old. So I'm pretty sure I get that award. But I'm so glad to be here with you today because I get to tell you a little bit about from teacher prep to becoming a teacher educator and what that journey has been like for me, and how Georgia Southern in particular helped to shape me to be the educator that I am. Now, I talk about this in chapters, and I'll tell you a story that I have never told, because as the great Maya Angelou said, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And it wasn't until Childa and Amy asked for stories of my experience that I had to dig deep to say, am I going to tell this story? Is it time to tell this story? And there's no better time than now to tell this story. So reflecting on my Georgia Southern experience, I had a pretty rudimentary education. Like it was good. It was okay. It was good. It was solid, right? I can write the best lesson plans ever. All right. I can fill out all of the boxes. The students will be engaged. I will have the best lesson plan structurally ever. I can write the best IEPs that you have ever, behavior plans, you name it, right? I'm nailing those things. But there was a part of my education that was missing. And it was anything related to equity or justice. It was completely absent. Now, I didn't really think much of it. I didn't think that was that important. It was something that I experienced in life. So I figured I could always put it into my lessons when I saw fit. But then I had this experience where I was put into a classroom with a blatantly racist clinical supervisor. Blatantly racist. Within the first 3 weeks of being in her class, she reported to another member of our faculty that I had planned a lesson for 4 days to watch a movie. That doesn't even make sense. Nobody plans a lesson of 4 days to watch a movie. But the faculty member believed her, and I was put on a professional development plan. Now, for a student who has never received any sort of critical feedback in that vein of being put on a professional development plan messes with you in wild ways. Every day I went to that classroom, I watched her interaction with all of the Black students she had in that class. She was dismissive. She was harsh. She was critical. She was mean. And when I think back to that time, I'm thinking about, why didn't I tell somebody? Why didn't I tell someone what was happening in that classroom? And the reason was because that door had never been opened for me. No, like who would I tell? Would I tell the people who had ignored race and racism my entire educational career? Who was I going to go to with that? I later found out that teacher in her what was covert racism a lot when I was in that classroom became overt racism when the student after me joined her. She told that student in a casual conversation that she was so disappointed by one of the white students who had gone into the community and started to create N-word babies with the N-words in the community. Her racism was pervasive, and I had to sit and live in that with her. That was part of my teacher training. But I was lucky because then I had a period of restoration with some of the faculty at Georgia Southern. So I was in the McNair program, which helps to build people of color and tell them about their excellence and help them grow in magnificent ways. And my mentor was Dr. Kimberly Harris. And she affirmed me in ways that I don't even think that she realized I needed at the time, because she didn't know about the experiences of racism that I had in my development. And I'm going to stop at chapter 3 now, just because I want to make sure that we have time for everything. But a call to all faculty members is to open those doors that allow conversations for your students. You have to. Because the destruction that it does going forward is immeasurable. The trauma that put me through is immeasurable. But what the silver, very thin silver lining is that I now come back, and when I have my teacher educators, and when I teach teachers, I ensure to open that door and have those conversations with them to help them.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm David Lewis, joining you here from Nashville, Tennessee. Very excited to be a part of this panel this morning. And want to take my part from the lens of K-12 education. Currently, I serve as a freshman academy principal at Pearl-Cohn High School here in Nashville. And K-12 is my lens. This is my home. This is where I've lived for the last 9 years. It's something I wouldn't trade for the world. In terms of my story, my work in anti-racist education really starts with my upbringing. I come from a family who came up. My grandparents actually came up in Atlanta and went to Washington High School. At the time, one of the only 2 Black high schools in Atlanta. Later went on to pursue careers in education. My grandmother was a guidance counselor her entire career. My grandfather started out as a teacher at Brown High School, which was the other Black high school that was designated for Atlanta. And just as that trickled down through my immediate family, through my upbringing as a person, I attended Creekside High School, grew up just south of Atlanta. My community went through a shift where white flight was real. Black folks in particular, we got access to the suburbs and white people went running. All right, so that was a very real thing. And my high school had to survive the ebbs and flows of that transition. During my time in high school, I saw where people who looked like me, people who knew what I was thinking, people who talked like me, people who understood what I was going through really made a difference in my life, in addition to my family. Made a major difference that influences not only my work today, but just who I am as a person. All right, so in terms of K-12 education, I'm going to start here with this concept that once you're aware, you're accountable. When you're aware of an issue, you are then accountable to address that issue in a way that's authentic to you. So in terms of professional practices as an educator, all right, I'm going to start with these first two bullets purposely and intentionally. Number one, creating culturally responsive environments. All right, so it's a theme of culturally responsive teaching within education, but the teaching portion is good, but the environment is first. If you do not have a classroom that promotes safe spaces for students to express themselves, to have some voice and some choice in what they're doing, to express their frustrations, to express cultural issues that are going on, then you're not going to be able to teach them much. It's an old adage that, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is a very real thing. Okay. Moving on to curriculum and instruction. Okay. Representation matters. Right now, we teach our kids a bunch of lies. And I'll be very real and very frank about that. We teach our kids a bunch of lies in the sense that we omit the contributions of people of color within our curriculum, within our instruction, all right, within the way that we teach our students and the way that they receive access points to different contents and standards. All right. Those are issues. All right. So representation matters in your curriculum and instruction, and identifying students of color specifically for things like gifted services, dual enrollment, honors courses, AP courses. On the flip side of it, our students of color are overrepresented in educational services in terms of SPED education or exceptional education. Okay. But on the flip side of it, these are also on the other end in terms of higher or pushing students to think higher, different ways that we can push students and allow them access to future opportunities through also allowing them to explore these opportunities, not just being in SPED courses, but I can recommend you for AP courses. I can recommend you for our gifted services within our district, things of that nature. And lastly, discipline practices. All right, research will show you can study almost any research that's out there that there are disciplinary disproportionalities between students of color and their white peers. Okay, leading to what's known as the school to prison pipeline. All right, the more you have exclusionary discipline, the more likelihood of that student coming into contact with the justice system and a bunch of residual effects from there. All right, so contact with the juvenile or the justice system, lower employment rates, lower healthcare rates, things of that nature that have residual things. And these are the racial impact that we talk about here. Okay, so just stories from the field. Okay, so I'm not just making this up and I'm not just pulling this out of Joe Blow's research. All right, these are actually quotes that I've heard from my short time in education. All right, things like these kids will be in jail or pregnant in a few years anyway. All right, coming from one of my white colleagues who had a rough day. Okay, I don't know why he chose to say that in front of me, but it didn't end well. All right. The compliment that students respond to you differently as a Black male educator, that is a very marginalizing place to be. Okay, because it comes from a place of, oh, you're a Black male, that's why you're a good educator, versus you're a Black male and you have great instructional strategies. The components of your lesson are great. You are, breaking down content delivery across all domains of learning, in order for students to have equal access and have equity within your classroom. That's why that particular quote is problematic. Okay. My brother going to college, coming out of high school, came home very frustrated one day. What's going on, man? My brother attended Morehouse, graduated from Morehouse in 2008. All right. He said he had a conversation with a teacher, okay, who basically, paraphrasing here, you're going to ask why he's going to Morehouse, told him he's smart, and told him he should go to a real college, right? And you can really insert any HBCU that you would like to in that category, okay? That's not a story that's exclusive to my brother at all, all right? However, that's a mindset issue that a lot of teachers have and perpetuate on a year-to-year basis, especially with graduating seniors who are headed on to post-secondary education. All right. The only time I've ever been moved to tears outside of graduations is in the instance where I had an assistant principal colleague of mine who called our school resource officer, our police officer in the school, for a student who was being disrespectful. Right? That was the end of my day. because at that time I was responsible for discipline within the school. And she and I had encounters before. However, when you go to the point where you are calling a police officer for a student being disrespectful, that is an issue. That is a mindset issue, and that perpetuates racism within our school. And yes, the student had all the identity markers that he needed for her to be scared and to get emotional in a situation where he was being disrespectful, but disrespect is not illegal, right? Foster kid, gang affiliated, prior background, disciplinary background, incarceration background. She couldn't get past her emotions in that moment, which could have cost that kid to be arrested again, if not worse, in the climate that we live in. Luckily, we had a good SRO, okay? And we double teamed that, and he had built relationships where we could get a young man what he needed, all right? And then, of course, just to wrap it up, like the whole mindset that, oh, send him to Miss Johnson, who happens to be Mr. or Miss Johnson, who happens to be the black teacher on the hallway, who's good at discipline and good at classroom management. Send the bad kids to them. That's an underlying theme in education all the way around, which again is problematic and an issue. Don't be that person. And then lastly, I added this in. Students are sophisticated enough, especially at the secondary level, that if they start to say things like, he or she doesn't like me, he or she is a racist, he or she is blank, 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 they are sophisticated enough and maybe don't have the vocabulary to properly define certain things, but they know when somebody does not like them. They know when somebody is being a racist. They know if at the least they're being a bigot, okay? And the systems and procedures and the expectations in the classroom deny them access to an equitable education, okay? So listen to those things. One of my favorite quotes came from Dr. Donna Ford here at Vanderbilt. The less you know, the more you make up. And she was speaking in terms of DEI. She was speaking specifically towards race. Okay, I'll be honest. Some of the black students and brown students that my white colleagues have made up in their heads scare me. Right? I don't even know how to define it. Where did y'all find this dude at? Right? They scare me. But the fact is, they haven't taken the time to build relationships with students. They haven't taken the time to delve into who the students are, who the community is, and who comes to school every day in order to know. So the less they know, of course, you're going to make up this monster in your head because you don't know who they are, right? So on the flip side of it, outside of students, doing the self-work, and I know somebody's going to take self-work here later on, so I don't want to steal that thunder. But number one, suspending your judgment. You suspend your judgments by knowing your community, your students, and the story, especially in the South, right? In the South, your community probably has some type of racial makeup and some type of racial story behind it. Knowing that story makes up a major part of how you approach your work. All right. Zip codes do not determine outcome. Right now, I work in the zip code that had the highest incarceration rate for black males in the entire nation for 10 years running. Right. If I approach my work saying, oh, my kid's going to probably be in jail anyway, that will really probably influence the way I think about my students. Right. So zip codes don't determine outcomes. And students do not need saviors. And I put white, black, and brown on this one because white folks don't need to be saviors for our students. Black folks are not saviors just because you black and you in the classroom. That doesn't equate, being any type of savior. And then our brown colleagues who are interacting with all of our students are not saviors either. Our students don't need saviors. They need to be heard. They don't need disciplinarians. They need to be heard. They don't need policing. They need to be heard. They need to be given equal opportunity, equal access to both secondary options. And equal access to education, period. So in doing your self-work, and working yourself as a person and as a professional, explore DEI opportunities, acknowledge your privilege. I heard it said best the other day during an interview. We're not asking anybody to denounce your privilege. You have it. I have it. Everybody on this panel has it. But what are you doing with it? All right. So acknowledge your privilege. Acknowledge that you have bias. We all do. It's problematic. But if it's dealt with actively, then it becomes something that you can deal with and you can be conscious of. And again, if you're aware, you're accountable. All right. And then acknowledge the fact that you might have had one intention in certain cases. It's not a perfect process, but you had another impact. All right. So your intention may have been absolutely great, but the way that you came off or the way that you said or did something may not have rubbed people the right way. And that's something to grow from. Okay. And we've all been there. Protect your energy. To my white colleagues, hey, don't don't get into the woods or the weeds with those who are negative or racially influential or have a negative outlook on race, right? And my Black colleagues and my brown colleagues, we are not the purveyors of our knowledge. It's not our job to make people feel comfortable, nor is it our job to have every answer for everything that's Black and brown on earth. People need to do their own work. People need to find their own resources to address their own issues. And at the end of the day, learn until you can act. Listen, read, find places to grow until you can take action. Thank you.
Amy, you're muted.
I'm humbled to be in the company of these presenters, and now you know Amy, clumsy and awkward, that's who she is. I wanted to talk just quickly about how I came to this work, and it was the benefit of being in a small, intentionally very diverse graduate program. We were 50% over a 4-year span, I would say. 50% of us were white, and 50% of us were Black and Hispanic, but Latinx. And that led to a lot of very intimate, deeply personal conversations. And not everybody has that opportunity because we're in such a heavily segregated society. It may not be de jure segregation by law, but the fact of the matter is when you look around, we are fairly strongly segregated in terms of where we live, where we pray, even in terms of where we go to hospitals and doctors, and when we look into schools. So this was a switch for me, a different kind of environment, and it resulted in some very different perspectives on the world. The first of which is the world looks different from different sets of eyes, and that can be racially coded. So learning about the experience of raced folks, because I came into it with sort of the white naivete, that so, well, we're all equal, we all have our chances. I don't see Black, brown, or green. Of course, there aren't no green people. And then realizing that our society does race people, and then that has impacts. Coming to understand the concept of white privilege and what that means, particularly that I always have choices. I have choices to notice, I have choices to listen or not. And that's why I say not knowing quite who this audience is, I don't know which perspective you're coming from. So let me speak for a moment to our white folks in the audience and give the example of an experience with this group. We were traveling to a conference. We were in a university bus because none of us could afford plane tickets, driving 12 hours up to Pittsburgh from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And we stopped in West Virginia at a McDonald's. We all got out, we got our order. The one weirdo ordered his cheeseburger without meat because he's a vegetarian. It was McDonald's, whatever my thing. And then we got our food and we all traipsed back to the bus and to the van. And pretty soon these two white women came up and the side door of the van was open and they stuck their heads inside the van. You're like, we just want to know what y'all are doing together. And we're like, oh, we're going to a conference. I was like, yeah, we're having a great time. We closed the door. My colleagues of color all sighed and guffawed. And I was like, what? They were curious about us. I was getting attention. You're like, that's not what that was, Atkins. That was their license and liberty to come in and notice us, speculate about us, and then insert themselves into our business. That seems like a really trivial example, but it was so impactful for me of realizing that we were in the same moment, the same van, very different experiences of what had taken place, and some were deeply hurt by it. And I was just like, well, whatever. And so trying to realize fundamentally the personal relationships is where you can come to understand things like how the world is experienced differently. It's where you have your opportunity to listen and to learn and to generate a feeling of that you're compelled to contribute to anti-racist projects.
So I want to just sort of get the ball rolling on what we can do. And I know David talked a bit about what we can do. So I'll to be anti-racist. And so I'll specifically focus on anti-Black racism. We have to acknowledge our own anti-Blackness, the ways we exploit Black culture, the European standards of beauty and speech, behavior, and aesthetics that we hold, that are anti-Black. The ways we dehumanize Black people, right? We do this when a Black person is murdered or killed, and we victim blame them as opposed to looking at the systems or the individuals that took their life. Make deficit assumptions about Black people and culture. From the examples I heard David share, where teachers were assuming that a student's fate in life was already determined by virtue of them being Black and existing in a particular zip code. We have to confess our anti-Black ideas. If we don't say them out loud, we don't acknowledge them, and we can't work with them. We have to identify anti-Black systems and policies and practices. We all exist, and we sit at tables of influence. It could be a small table, it could be a large table, depending on what your work is or what your service is, your activism is. But we have to know, when is it that we are in a position to affect change, right? If you have a syllabi with Black people as only in the deficit, what messaging are you sending to students? It moved me as a teacher educator when I had Jamila talk about who could she tell that she was experiencing racism when the curriculum of her program in teacher development had never affirmed her identity and had never, ever said that this was even a topic that we could bring to discussion. When we're tokenizing Black people, saying that there's only one or there's a talented 10th, that's anti-Blackness. And then we have to work to change anti-Black systems, policies, and practices. Once you know that it's there, as David mentioned in his quote, then we have to do some work to change that. A different way you can look at it more broadly is just that educating yourself, that decentering. It's so important to be able to decenter yourself. Develop and continuously refine a racial equity lens. You want to authentically affirm Black, Indigenous people of color. To bring it back to Jamila's point of meeting Dr. Kimberly Harris and having that affirmation where it had not been there before. You want to talk about race and the impacts of race as a community. Analyze wherever your scope is, frame of influence. Analyze those school structures through a racial equity lens, and then be proactive and build alliances.
This time I unmuted myself before I started talking. When I think about what I try and contribute to this work, I want to start by acknowledging where I screw it up, because I think that's really important. So I flipped it to the pitfalls, and the phrase I use is tripping over my whiteness. I do come from the best of intentions as a result, not only of that prior experience I talked about, but just about thinking of myself as a good human being. But that doesn't mean that it always comes across, as David acknowledged, the intention and the impact. Those can be different. Another example would be when I had African-American, Native American colleagues, Pam and Carlin, they came up to the floor where the Dean Suite was. And I've been friends with them for years, and they were colleagues at Illinois State University. And they got off the elevator, and I said, well, what are you two doing here? And what I meant was, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. But what came across, even as they know me, what came across was, what business do you have up here? So that's what I have to talk about, tripping over my whiteness. It's easy for me to forget to consider race. And when I'm in a more segregated space, in a more all-white space, all the easier to forget to be mindful of race. So I have to maintain my connections, whether by reading or listening to podcasts and the people that I interact with, listening to my friends and colleagues of color very carefully about their experiences. When I forget, I usually get a reminder. I'm like, yep, there I was tripping over my whiteness. Reference again to my clumsiness. What I try to contribute is helping other white folks to come to some perspective like this, to understand the need to listen to others, listen to their truths, cross those bridges. My commitment to listening to the stories that I hear from my colleagues of color, friends of color, without skepticism and doubt, but really listening to what they have to say. Definitely in line with what Shelby was just saying, changing the curriculum, intentionally amplifying the voices and the work of people of color. So making sure that in the course readings I have, whatever I'm teaching, that I've got folks, African-American scholars, and I've got Native American scholars, I've got Latinx scholars, I've got gay and lesbian scholars in there, and I make a point of pointing that out to the students. And the last point I want to bring up is recognizing the steps in the dance. As we are, as an institution, Georgia Southern, talking about our diversity and inclusive excellence, what happens typically is first, we do achieve some diversification. We bring new people into the organization and things change because we brought new people into the organization at different points of view and perspectives of the world. And when things change, the dominant class, in this case, the white class, will say, we've lost our sense of rigor. That's a very academic claim to make, but basically acknowledge things have changed. But that's the point. We're trying to change the organization to bring in different representation so that it is a more equitable and just space for everyone. So I'm going to pause there. Thank you.
So I keep thinking, so where do we and Childa and Amy, they're talking about, and David has already told us, where do we grow from here? How do we continue to grow? And just going back to my story quickly, is that she did not happen in isolation. She did not happen by herself. People like Gregory McMichael, who killed Ahmaud Arbery, devaluing of a Black life, did not happen in isolation. These things don't happen in isolation. It is a pattern of behavior and education. So what we are currently seeing in our society, when we see lots of civil unrest and we're seeing that people are shouting for equity and equality and for their lives, that is a reflection of our education system. What are we doing in our classroom that's allowing these sort of people to grow up and be a part of our community without going unchecked? What is it that we're doing? So for educators, if you don't like what's going on, do something different. Commit to ongoing learning. Commit to learning with other people. Commit to being uncomfortable. It's hard. It's terrible. It's really frustrating. It is. It's all of those things. But it is beyond necessary. Commit, and in that, commit to making a mistake. It's okay to say the wrong thing one time. It's even more important that you learn from that thing and you do something differently next time. But you have to be willing to dive into that. Commit to open-mindedness. Amy just talked about listening intently, believing people when they tell you that they are having a hard time experiencing discrimination, marginalization. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody is like, yes, you know what I want to do? I want to say that I'm being discriminated against because that's fun. Black people in our country are shouting discrimination, not because it's fun. We got lots to do. There's plenty of other things to do. We would love to do other things than to have our lives and bodies and minds respected and valued in our society. We would love to do that. But right now we have to shout for our lives. Think about that. Just think about that. And commit to other people's truths.
Excellent. Oh, we have received some important information and experienced powerful stories about the challenge of becoming and being an anti-racist educator from our panelists. Now it's your opportunity to get involved in the discussion and ask questions. Again, to pose a question to the panelists, please include your name and whether you are an alumni, student, staff, or faculty in the Q&A box on the screen. Dr. Kristen Dickens will present the questions to the panel. Just remember, check that link for the evaluation once we're actually done.
All right, so the first question is from a faculty member. I will read it straight to you. I am a white faculty member, and over the many years that I have been here in the College of Education, I have served on a lot of search and other committees. I've always been very enthusiastic about making sure to invite faculty of color in all walks of life to serve on the committees because their diverse viewpoints and perspectives are critically important to the process. However, how do we do this without tokenizing Black faculty members? Panelists?
I'll take a stab at that. It's really a fine line. what we know and what I personally experience is that when you are a Black faculty member, you have the work that everybody else has, which is scholarship, service, teaching, and you have to do all of those things well. But then you have the additional work of holding students who are being marginalized, holding yourself as you're being marginalized, still doing the community and activism work. And so when we take a racial equity lens, we know and we account for all of that invisible labor that faculty are doing. And then we try to figure out if the faculty member is expending an additional 10 to 15 hours a week doing unrequired advising and mentoring, how can I maybe relieve their load so that they can maybe also be on the faculty search? And then the most important thing that I try to encourage anyone who is doing some hiring work to think about is cluster hiring. It's really exhausting to be by yourself and to be the lone person, to have to be representative of all things Black or all things people of color. So if we have community, then one person doesn't have to be the one stretched and pulled to be in spaces all the time.
And of course, I mean, I'm not a faculty member on anybody's campus. However, reading into the language of that question, you're excited to invite faculty members of color for interviews and things of that nature. But it makes me question personally, not just at Georgia Southern, but in general, are you happy to invite people to serve on hiring committees, or are you happy to hire people of color? Because if you're happy to hire people of color, then it doesn't make it becomes the norm. And then there's no big thing to invite somebody of color because you have faculty members of color already in place. And then to Dr. Smith's point, they don't have to be the purveyors of all knowledge, and they don't have to bear that burden on their shoulders of being the only one, if that is your hiring norm. So just posing that as a way to push thinking.
Dr. Atkins, I know you answered in the chat, which I believe everyone can see. But just in case.
Yeah. No, I think it's to David's point that if you are successful, and Shelby's, if you're successful in cluster hiring, then you've got more people to work with in forming your search committees, and then you can't tokenize because you've got plenty of folks just like any other metric. And so it's a challenge to get the ball rolling, right? To commit to hiring a diverse pool of applicants, whether it's teachers in K-12 or if it's faculty at university, or if you're in a marketing organization and you're hiring new consultants. But getting that commitment going first so that you are populating within the organization, sustaining and retaining them in the organization, and then they are contributing to changing the shape of the organization, and then you're going to get past tokenization.
We have another question. So this question is, what does it mean to decenter yourself?
I'm a typer, so I went ahead and responded in chat to that. But the idea of making room for other people and their experiences so that you can listen to them. It's my refrain is always, it's not all about me. It's not more about me. Let me hear what's happening with you. And so that's that decentering, kind of physically move yourself to the margin so that somebody else can take center stage and present themselves and how they experience the world. And then how do you work together to respond?
What I'd add to that is a recognition of power imbalances. So for instance, and humanization. So when I read Amy's answer, what I think about is also what it would mean if Amy were to offend me. And then when I acknowledge that offense, she starts crying. All of a sudden, the offense that I experience is no longer being centered. It's not, I'm no longer being humanized because Amy's white tears will mean more. It will mean that she is automatically right. It will mean that she has been hurt. It will mean that I am villainized. Mm-hmm. And so that decentering is sometimes literally stopping yourself from crying, stopping yourself from yelling, stopping yourself from talking. Amy deliberately decided today that she would have less speaking time, that she would come third. She made herself a little bit smaller, even though she's an equal panelist, to amplify the voices of the others here, because it is rare that those voices get to be amplified. That's what it means to decenter yourself.
We have more questions. We'll just keep going. So this next one is, I am a white faculty member with an undergraduate student who has indicated to me that the students with whom she has been grouped have sought to exclude her, perhaps because of her race. I have offered to conference with her with the department chair, which she declined. She just indicated she didn't want to be grouped with her original group. This has happened before with other students of color. What can I do to help her?
So the first question I have is thinking about what climate is in the classroom that has created a division where that is okay. So rather than having a conference with that student, what conference is being had with these students who are being exclusionary? So I think the focus shouldn't be on that student first. It needs to be on the climate and then also on the other students who are being exclusionary. So we have a place to start rather than with that student.
I would second that. As the only Black male in my entire graduate program, in both graduate programs I can remember, I've been in that position so many times, and it's extremely frustrating. But the focus shouldn't be on me. While my contributions were belittled, marginalized, totally discredited, disregarded, that's not my problem. Because what I was saying was right on point, to the effect that if a white student said the exact same thing that I was saying, it was taken like it was the greatest new idea that ever came up, right? That's something that we as Black students and Black professionals have to navigate. This is the landscape for us. But it's not for us to be addressed about it. It's for those around to be addressed about it. So that's the take. I was second that totally.
All right. I think we have time for at least one, maybe two more. I'm watching the time. This next one is, I am a white female teacher of ninth graders, mostly students of color. I've already started restructuring my curriculum to include stories that showcase diversity outside of suffering, but I was wondering if you have any other tips or advice for approaching sensitive issues with my students. I often feel disingenuous being the white lady in the room talking about racism.
I'll take this one from K-12 standpoint. Let your students do the talking. It's not for you to do a whole lot of talking. Give them the opportunity to express themselves, but they need to be heard. They need to be legitimized, and their voices need to be amplified in your setting. It's good. I'm glad that you're coming off the suffrage movement for people of color and moving into allowing them spaces to express themselves. And you're right on the right track, but give them the floor. They need it.
So a part of this is making me think about, I feel disingenuous, the white lady in the room talking about racism. Here's what's interesting. White people created racism. So white people should feel real comfortable talking about racism, right? And their role in creating racism, right? And not your personal role, but historical role in creating racism. So embrace that. Embrace the history of racism when you talk about it and present it to your students. And I also echo David in facilitating those conversations and making space for those conversations.
Added in the chat here in response to what you said, we need to own it, right? We need to own it in those conversations, Jamila, just the way you brought it up. And I want to acknowledge another question that had come in about hiring practices, wanting to commit to hiring diverse folks, bringing in people of color to your organization, but then how do you get it going? And realizing that's systemic. So my response to the person was, well, in part it's on us in colleges of education. If you're looking to hire teachers of color, we need to be preparing more teachers of color and preparing them, supporting them, Janella, to your experience, preparing them, getting them out there to be in the hiring pool, which also means we need to be recruiting and retaining students of color as candidates. which means we also need to be bringing in faculty of color to be a welcoming place, providing, not that the work is on their shoulders, David, mindful of your point, but being able to check the experiences, for example, that Jamila had and not knowing where to turn, right? So that's what it means to say that it's a systemic problem. And so you got to find more than one thread to pull if you want to transform that sweater. You can pull on one thread, and it'll take you a long time. But if you can find more threads to pull and pull from different directions. Sorry.
Excellent. Wonderful responses. We appreciate the panelists for the time, energy, and effort that they've contributed to our conversation today. The testimonies we've heard are of critical importance, particularly in this moment of racial and social justice activism that we're experiencing in the United States. Our charge is to take what we've learned today, internalize it, actualize it in the schools and institutions we work in and in our communities. A caption recording of this session will be available on the College of Education website in 7 days. We also thank Dr. Mika Williams-Johnson, Professor of Curriculum, Foundations, and Reading on the Statesboro campus, and Mr. Alan Harklerode from Instructional Technology for hosting the program. We look forward to more discussions within the college. Please see the web link again to submit an evaluation for today's panel. A few more announcements before we go. Community and Conversations Groups will start its first group meeting on October 20th on NPR's podcast titled Code Switch at 1 p.m. And a few more upcoming events. November 12th, the event is the Lillian Smith Breaking the Silence on the Armstrong campus. Again, we thank you for your participation today, and we appreciate your involvement.
Oh, I just want to add, we do have one more. We are offering a Willow Hill virtual tour. This is the African American school that was built right at the end of the Civil War in Portal, Georgia. And we want to make sure that we recognize this heritage museum and school and give everyone an opportunity to take an opportunity to take a ride through this virtual tour. The director will give us more on the history and what we can do to help preserve and participate in what's happening in our local communities, especially around education in Portal, Georgia. So we thank everyone for your participation, and I want to make sure I give a heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists for your time and experience in sharing with us today. We can't pay you for all the things that you have contributed, but just know that it will be received and loved, and we thank you for all that you've done.
Dr. Williams-Johnson, one question.
Yeah.
Where can people sign up for the virtual tour? That question just came through.
So we're going to send out the Zoom link closer to the date, and that will be sent out throughout the college and the university. Thank you again.